Let me put this into perspective. It was 1996, specifically July 1996, when the NWO was formed. The New World Order of Wrestling, brother, was taking over WCW, and it didn't take very long, because the following month at Road Wild, Hulk Hogan wins the world title from the Giant. And for the better part of the following year, the NWO can't do anything wrong. They do lose some affairs. They do lose some matches here and there. Usually multi-man matches that involve 6. But a lot of the focus is placed on the New World Order. And that's it. Right? We're in September 1997. September 1997 is completely in the midst of the build to Starrcade 1997, the match of the century, billed as the match of the century, Sting versus Hulk Hogan. A year of build from the previous year's Fall Brawl 1996, all the way up to 1997 at Starrcade. I always strived, because of that, because of Taz versus Sabu, I always strived for the idea of a year-long build. But it never delivered. It always underwhelmed. I do think Taz and Sabu delivered more than Sting and Hulk Hogan ended up delivering. But the fact of the matter is, let's look at this pay-per-view and let me explain between now and the end of the video why I chose to look at Fall Brawl 1997. We get the starting point, a hot opener, like we always do with WCW pay-per-views at this particular time, with Eddie Guerrero defeating Chris Jericho for the World Cruiserweight title in a highlight of the broadcast, undoubtedly, and another solid affair with the Steiners and Harlem Heat in the second match. Alex Wright and the Ultimo Dragon with the television title on the line. You gotta figure that Alex Wright was guided to a solid contest with the Ultimo Dragon. Another solid match with Jeff Jarrett and Dean Malenko. Wrath and Mortis versus the Faces of Fear. I have to question this matchup because I'm pretty sure both of these teams were heels at this particular time. So I don't know who the hell the fans were cheering for or why it went 12 minutes. But we moved to Scott Norton versus the Giant. And I think if you shifted down probably 4 minutes, let's say, from the tag team match, made it go 7-8 minutes instead of 12, and you added that time you take away from the tag match to the Giant versus Scott Norton, the Giant and Scott Norton could have had a decent hoss fight. Or even if you took 5 minutes away from the tag team match with the Faces of Fear and Wrath and Mortis, and you made that just a hoss fight for a short period of time, and you added it to the tag team match with Dallas Page and Luger against the NWO, that would have worked out too. Especially with the fact that the semi-main was a no disqualification match. Here's the start of things that I would change. The start of things that I would change is I'd move this match back, the semi-main event, and probably put it here in the 5th spot, and then put Wrath and Mortis against the Faces of Fear and the Giant and Scott Norton in the 6th and 7th spot. But I'd also pull time from this tag match, like I've said, and either give it to the Giant and Scott Norton and the no disqualification tag team match, or all of it to the no disqualification tag team match instead. Because this match doesn't need to go 12 minutes, and this match, being no disqualification, should have a little bit more time. But also, with it being no disqualification, I don't like it in a position right before a match that is also no holds barred, because I think it's sort of redundant having one match after the other. But it is the NWO, Bagwell, Kevin Nash, Conan, and Six against the Four Horsemen, Benoit, Kurt Hennig, Ric Flair, and Mongo. It was prior to this. It was prior to this that Arn Anderson did the My Spot promo, giving his spot in the Horsemen to Kurt Hennig, who had just debuted, I believe it was at Bash at the Beach, as Diamond Dallas Page's partner against the New World Order. So him being in this match was a special situation, because also this was still very early in Hennig's return to the ring following a very severe back injury that sidelined him for the better part of a year after to end his WWE run. But I do want to put something into perspective. This match is in Flair country. Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the old stomping ground of Crockett Promotions. And you get this crowd hot, they will make you a lot of money. They will stay loyal. You give them a moment, you give them a reason to care, they will show you why North Carolina was the hotbed of wrestling in the 1980s and the 1970s with Jim Crockett Promotions. You give them a reason, they'll give you everything they got. One switch I would make as far as the participants in the War Games is I'd probably swap Scott Hall in 6. I'd probably put Scott Hall in the War Games and 6 in the tag team match instead. This way, Luger has somebody that can sell for him in a way that 6 can sell for him that Scott Hall can't. But this is also the night where Kurt Hennig turned on the Horsemen and joined the NWO. And if you look at this, Kurt Hennig sides with the NWO, and the New World Order handcuffed Benoit and Mongo to the cage and begin assaulting Ric Flair. Defiant till the end, the Horsemen try and keep fighting, but after threats of Flair getting potentially severely injured, the Horsemen finally relent, and then Hennig, of all people, slams the cage door on Flair anyway. Think about the heat, especially the heat that Hennig had. and that could have been built up and built up and built up and added a layer to the NWO story to where Flair would finally get his revenge, would finally get his comeuppance to the NWO and give the NWO some comeuppance. But the fact of the matter is, all the money, all the eggs were in one basket. All the eggs were to Sting and Hulk Hogan. Some of it was to Diamond Dallas Page and Randy Savage, but the fact that Diamond Dallas Page would then not win a world title until 1998 should say something. But in my opinion, the fact that Ric Flair and Curt Hennig was not invested in more, because you turn on Flair in Flair country, you injure Flair in Flair country, you try and kill the Horseman in Horseman country. And all that comes from it is a rematch a little bit down the road at, was it Starrcade or Halloween Havoc? I'm not saying Flair should have won this match. I'm not saying he should have won this match. Because it would be like saying that Diamond Dallas Page should have won this match. And yes, you could say, oh, well, the cracks were starting to form because Piper and Hogan, and Piper beat Hogan. But again, yeah, Piper beat Hogan, but again, world title wasn't on the line. Oh, because we want to take the belt and put it on Sting. Okay, fine. No disqualification for the United States Championship. Hennig beats Flair again. I'm not saying that killed it, because knowing the NWO and knowing the fact that Curt Hennig, by this point, would have been managed by Rick Rude, more than likely, it is starting to, it's starting to make you question, is Flair going to get anything out of this feud from Hennig? And the answer to that question is, Diamond Dallas Page gets the title victory instead. And where is Ric Flair on Starrcade? The biggest night in WCW to date. You have the hottest thing in the company for the year 1998 against Mongo. You have a solid match with Saturn and Benoit. But Ric Flair, after losing back-to-back months to Curt Hennig, after being embarrassed, never gets his revenge. It made him look like a clown. It made him look like a fool. And you could say, oh, well, why would Ric Flair, the multiple-time world champion, why would he want to be the United States champion? This was Dallas's time to step out and get something. I'm not saying Flair should have been the United States champion. Even though if Dally beat Flair for the U.S. title, he still could have been the U.S. champion and beat Flair. Because think about what it would have meant if Dallas Page beat Flair and Randy Savage in short order in back-to-back feuds. But if you go back here and then you look ahead to Halloween Havoc, if you look ahead to World War III, if you look ahead to Starrcade, the fact of the matter is, there is no revenge for the Horsemen against the NWO. Even the lower level members of the NWO like Buff Bagwell and Conan. There is no revenge. And if you take it out and you look at it from a different point of view, February 1998 is when the Steiner brothers break up and Scott Steiner turns on Rick in a tag team match against the Outsiders and officially joins the New World Order. After Hogan loses to Sting, if you want to call it that, at Starrcade. My question is, why couldn't it have been where Starrcade was when cracks started to form in the New World Order, and then they get back in the positives, they get back in the right direction at Super Brawl, gaining Scott Steiner and changing the faction and refreshing the New World Order, eliminating some of the dead weight, eliminating some of the people that could use a refresh, like probably at that point Buff Bagwell could have used a refresh by 1998. But also, if you think about it, by mid-1998, Kevin Nash is out of the faction. Randy Savage is out. Conan is out. Luger joins the NWA after spending the entire year feuding with them. Sting ends up joining the NWO. The Wolfpack. But still, my point is, this card wasn't that bad. But in my opinion, this card set WCW up to fall below expectations in 1997, and that the momentum was not going to last. Because people don't want to see baby faces, especially ones they love, be made a fool of over and over and over again, and made to look like a loser, because then they'll stop cheering for those people, because they will not understand what's the point if they're never going to win. What's the point if they're never going to get that big victory? What's the point if they are never going to get revenge on the person that made them look stupid? And that's what happened here. When you killed the moneymaker that was the Horseman, you killed the potential of money-making opportunities just by having a reliable legend. Yes, even in 1997, Ric Flair was a legend, leading a faction and being the one that holds on and puts cracks in the fact of the New World Order. Because how much you sold people in 1998 on the rivalry of Bret Hart versus Ric Flair, after Ric Flair just lost to Kurt Hennig back to back, instead of Flair getting any sort of revenge. And I know at least one person's going to say that is WCW. But if you want to look at the other side, just like I did eventually with the WWE, September 1997 in WWE is where they are honestly coming off one of the hottest SummerSlams of the time, of the run of SummerSlams, with Bret Hart versus Undertaker and Shawn Michaels as a special referee. And then you also lead, right now in the WWE, we're on the road to Hell in a Cell. It's the first meeting in September, it's the first meeting between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker. And I believe September 1997 is also Bret Hart versus The Patriot for the world title. But it's the ascension of Stone Cold. It's D-Generation X with Shawn Michaels and Triple H. And we are on the road eventually to the Montreal Screwjob. It just shows where the totems are different with WWE and WCW, that WCW had money on the table. It didn't take advantage of it. They had an opportunity and didn't take advantage of it. You know, when Ric Flair could have been a reliable challenger for Sting, you could have went back and did Flair versus Sting in 1998 instead of doing a clusterfuck that you did eventually, or the clusterfuck that we saw eventually because of the schmaz that happened at Starrcade. And if you think Flair and Sting wouldn't have sold in 1998, you don't know your audience very well. I firmly believe Flair versus Sting would have sold, and you could have also taken the pressure off the NWO as they retooled, because the fact is, the Horsemen could have been the focus against Sting. You didn't have to turn him heel because it wouldn't have worked, but Bret Hart could have led a heel faction against the Horsemen. Imagine that Bret Hart versus Chris Benoit. Imagine Bret Hart getting a good match at a Mongo, and imagine stakes to Flair versus Bret Hart, and Bret Hart challenging for the world title in 1998. Bret Hart having Chris Jericho. Bret Hart trying to convince fellow Canadian Chris Benoit to join the faction. And also imagine the stories, imagine the opportunity, imagine the stakes that could have been there for Flair trying to find somebody to take the final spot in the Horsemen. But also, in my opinion, with the beating that Flair had, with the embarrassment that he felt after being taken advantage of by Curt Hennig, you could have taken him off television until Starrcade, had him return at Starrcade to cost Curt Hennig the United States title, and made the personal matches happen in 1998. With Flair and Curt Hennig at Sold Out and at Super Brawl. And then you might ask, well, what Bret Hart? What would have Bret Hart done? Bret Hart could have came to WCW wishing to fight people like Chris Benoit, wanting to fight Eddie Guerrero and Chris Jericho, wanting to fight the people that he's never had the opportunity to fight because he had been within the ranks of the WWE, and challenging the faces that people never thought he'd fight, like Dallas Page and Randy Savage. Giving him a rematch against the Hot Rod. It would have been interesting. Putting him against Dean Malenko or Jeff Jarrett. You know, even if it kept him busy for a couple months, I'm just going to point out that if he had a feud with Chris Benoit from the outset, guess what? If Flair's in the picture against Sting, that opens up an interesting triple threat match, and also a couple of months of Bret Hart, Sting, and Flair fighting for the World Heavyweight Championship. I understand that WCW had a lot going on in 1998, but you could have hit the refresh button. I understand that the reason why they likely didn't is because at that point Eric Bischoff was preoccupied with other things and was not looking at the big picture because he couldn't, because all the eggs were in Starrcade. With that being said, though, that is it from me, and let me know your thoughts on Fall Brawl 1997. Was that when everything changed for WCW? And could you now, with how I broke down this pay-per-view and certain things, in certain ways, you could have also spun off Jericho, Benoit, Ultimo Dragon up to the United States title to give Dallas Page capable people to work with and refreshing the people he could work with outside of the New World Order. Because if you think about it, he kept the belt for 4 months, dropped it to Raven, Raven dropped it to Goldberg, and then he went right back to the NWO, did DDP. Imagine the matches he could have had against guys like Jericho, Guerrero, Ultimo Dragon, Chris Benoit, Conan, Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, Jeff Jarrett. The list goes on and on and on. There was opportunity, but the opportunity was never capitalized on, in my opinion. The fact of the matter is, I want to know what's yours. Let me know down in the comment section below. And if you want to see more of these, you can either show it in the comment section or show it in the views. I'm done for the day, and I will see you in the next one.